This was bound to be a long video, but I couldn't help it. There's too much to talk about. Everyone, roll initiative. Hello there, I'm Simon, welcome to my channel. Today's topic is Dungeons and Dragons. Specifically, I want to talk about combat in D&D, because I have some thoughts. There are some things about D&D's combat system that I find a little lacking, at least in order to create a realistic combat simulation. Which is not what it's about, of course, but I still want to see if I can make it a little more realistic. If nothing else, it might be a fun exercise. Of course, whether or not you actually use my additions is entirely up to you. So let's get on with it. One of the most unrealistic things about this system is that it's fundamentally turn-based. During a combat round, every combatant takes their turn to do stuff, and for 6 seconds, no one else can do anything. Not until the initiative comes back to them. And again, the DM in me, who needs this to keep track of what is actually happening, loves this. Otherwise, it would be very hard, if not impossible, to actually run combat. But it's a little far from the reality of a fight. In a real fight, things kinda just happen all at once. People just do things, and it's utter chaos. Or is it? Well, yes, but I do need to nuance it. Because while it's true that things do essentially happen all at once, there is somewhat of an order to it. It's all about action and reaction. Fighting is kinda like chess in that way. Just a very, very fast version of chess, where a bad move can mean getting hurt. I didn't say it was a perfect comparison, but it is very much a strategic game, where you try to get in an advantageous position against your opponent, and you do so by reacting to what your opponent does. So in that regard, rolling initiative does make a lot of sense, but I'm not sure it makes sense to give everyone 6 seconds. It feels like that's a little much. Don't get me wrong, it's very realistic that someone would need 6 seconds to do all the things that one can do in a turn. And game-wise, it would probably get boring to let people do less on each turn. But there's no way people are just gonna stand around doing nothing for 6 whole seconds during a fight. However, there is a very simple fix for this, and it doesn't even require any additional homebrew rules. All we need to do is reframe how we interpret the existing combat system. So people still take turns doing their thing, and they still get to do everything the player's handbook says they can do, and they still get 6 seconds to do it. But it's not 6 seconds for each combatant. Those are the same 6 seconds. Everything does happen pretty much at the same time, and the initiative order is not so much the order in which things happen, though that as well, but more so the order in which actions are resolved. The way I see it, there is a duality between the mechanics and the narrative. The mechanics are just a way to structure everything and to make it playable and fair. The narrative is the epic choreography that the mechanics describe. If you accept that, almost every rule in the system starts to make a lot more sense. And some of them were very sensical to begin with. Think about movement. During a round, which is 6 seconds, you get to move your walking speed. That's pretty much the only time your walking speed is actually relevant, because not even I get that nitpicky when it comes to travel in D&D. But if your time is limited, it matters. And you may think that your walking speed is kinda slow for a fight. Surely you're gonna be running. But think about it. That's not all you're doing in those 6 seconds. So if you spend some time doing other things, and you spend some time running around, that averages out to pretty much your walking speed. But what about those turns where you're only running? Well, that's what the dash action is for. Of course, it gets a teensy bit more complicated when you get to difficult terrain. That takes 1 foot of extra movement for every foot of difficult terrain. So basically, count the distance you spend in it double. I just feel like that could have been worded a little bit better, but I suppose there's a good reason for that. But it does make sense that it would use up more movement, because it takes more time. Or take the armor class. That number represents your defenses. So you may assume that your AC is literally just how strong your armor is. Like if an attack misses, it just bounces off of your armor. But if you know something about martial arts, you may think something along the lines of, well, what about blocking an attack? What if you use the attack to control and grapple them? And that is a fair point, in my opinion. Because it's my own point. So of course I'm gonna think it's fair. But that stuff is also included in your armor class. The way I see it, if an attack misses, when the initiative gets to the one that was attacked, they should get the chance to describe what they do to avoid the attack, and what they do using that chance, if they so choose. Those numbers represent so much more than they seem to, because what we intuitively think of is inevitably based on our own knowledge and experience. And mine happens to include 13 years of martial arts, but a lot of people don't have that. But people don't need that kind of knowledge themselves, because their character does have that, and it's represented by those numbers. But because I have a bit of background in martial arts, there are plenty of things that I know are possible in reality, but that don't seem to be possible in D&D. For example, if you're dual wielding, it is possible to parry an attack and do a counter-attack basically simultaneously. In D&D, you can't do that. I have complained about this on Facebook before, and someone said, well, just let them have that counter-attack on their next turn. Which is a good point, but I feel like that counter-attack is part of the parry in this case. So separating the parry and the attack into different moments is not only unrealistic, it's also kind of unfair. So I figured just give them an attack of opportunity as a reaction. You have to put on some restrictions, of course, so you don't unbalance your action economy. So maybe that's only for characters who have the two-weapon fighting style. And of course, they have to actually be dual wielding. The thing is that if you think about it, a simultaneous counterattack can be done with any weapon, not just dual wielding. In fact, you don't even need to be armed. So let's just say that fighters can get an attack of opportunity as a reaction. And before you know it, I've reinvented the riposte. Yeah, that's literally a thing Battlemaster fighters get. This is a thing that exists, and it's covered in a specific class feature. In fact, upon closer inspection, it turns out that a lot of the things that I thought were lacking in the D&D system are actually totally covered in feats for specific character choices. And if you think about it, that actually makes perfect sense. Because those things do take a lot of training and practice, so not everyone is going to be able to do them. So not including them in the general rule set, but still making them available as options for those characters that are trained in it, is exactly the right way to do it. I do think that the riposte as it is a little too limited, because it's probably something all fighters, and monks as well actually, should be able to do. Because it is quite a basic martial idea. This may turn out to be a very bad and unbalanced idea, but there's only one way to find out. But that does bring me to two-weapon fighting. By the way, notice that I've been saying dual wielding before, and not the two-weapon fighting style, which is technically the correct name. Reason being that that is a dumb name. There are two separate concepts, and for some reason they decided to call them both two-weapon fighting, even though there is a legitimate name for a fighting style with two weapons. It's called dual wielding, and I don't understand why they didn't just call it that. Anyway, two-weapon fighting, not the fighting style, is a bonus action, where you can use your offhand to make a second attack, if you use your action to attack, and if you can do both with weapons that you can use with one hand. So I'm not sure I understand what they're actually trying to do here. Are they trying to make this like a chaining of attacks, like the fighter's extra attack? Or is it kinda just an attack with the offhand? Because it seems to be just an attack with the offhand. And there's a lot of cases where you don't need to be attacking in order to still be able to use your offhand to attack. You don't need to be chaining attacks for that. Also, keep in mind that this is a general thing that literally everyone can do. Yes, anyone can try to dual wield, even if they never learned how to properly do that. but anyone can also just try to attack with their offhand. So I really don't see why a combo should be a generally allowed bonus action, but a single-handed no proficiency attack should not. So that's how I'll be using it. No proficiency bonus though, and both this and your action would have to be one-handed. So those are the main points that I really wanted to make in this video. But there's a couple of other things that I want to mention, because apparently this video isn't long enough yet. So I'm gonna try to make this a lightning round. I will fail. So according to the player's handbook, an attack hits if the roll plus modifiers equals or exceeds the armor class. Which I think is kinda weird, because your AC represents how good you are at not getting hit. So it would seem like that if the two numbers are exactly equal, your defenses will be just good enough to keep you safe. So you'd have to exceed the AC to hit, is what I thought the rule was. But in most cases they won't be exactly equal, so it doesn't matter that much. Another thing is that when you have resistance, the damage is halved. And when you have vulnerability, the damage is doubled. Which seems fair. But if you think about it, that means that resistance means a decrease of 50%, while vulnerability means an increase of 100%. So I think it might be better to have a 50% increase for vulnerability instead. According to the rules, if you are hidden and you attack, your location is revealed. You are no longer hidden. Which makes perfect sense in most cases. The thing is that that doesn't really cover something like stealthily preparing an attack. Imagine you are hidden and you have a blowpipe with poisoned darts. In that case, it would be perfectly doable to attack without instantly giving away your position. And let's be honest, that's probably the only exception. But still. Of course, for gaming purposes, it's easier to just make this the general rule. But in some cases, I might consider to have them roll stealth, to do it stealthily, if they so choose. The last rule I want to talk about concerns ranged weapons. Per the rules, if you try to hit someone who is within melee range, 5 feet, with a ranged weapon, you get disadvantage on that attack. Now it is true that this closer range is scarier and it gives you less time before they kill you. But that isn't really reflected in a disadvantage to hit. What it does reflect though is the haste that goes into doing that before they kill you. On the other hand, since they are closer, a case can be made for them being easier to hit, which might give advantage, which would then cancel out the disadvantage. Maybe. I am aware that a lot of these alterations I'm proposing here are probably not as balanced as they need to be for actual gameplay. I'm not a game designer though, so I don't know. I need to playtest these home rules. In conclusion, it turns out that the D&D combat system is probably the best system out there for a realistic combat simulation. At least that I know of. But the fact that I had to think it through this intensively, and that it took trying to find home rules to account for the system's limitations, for me to discover that those limitations aren't actually there if you think about it, does say something. Maybe about my understanding of it all. Anyway, that'll do for today. Time for the YouTube thing. Everything you can do is in the end screen, you know the drill. If you don't know what to comment, how about this? What is your favorite home rule for combat in D&D? And do you have a favorite moment from a D&D fight? I think my most memorable moment so far, at least the first that I think of, was the time we were all fighting a Dragonborn in an arena. And at the end, I, being the bard on duty, stole his spear and waved it around yelling, "Are you not entertained?" Anyway, thanks for watching.